morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is you're listening to this podcast. And we do want to thank you for listening to this podcast, which we're calling MiCAST. It's a clever combination of Misco and podcast. I'm Andrew Dickens, I'm the head of product management here at Misco, and for half an hour each month, roughly, I'm going to be Misco's answer to Joe Rogan. Bald head and everything. Each month we're going to have myself, a colleague from Misco, and a relevant, interesting person from the IT channel. I want to thank you again for joining us. Thanks to Logitech for providing the mic and the webcam. They're a great partner of ours, as are HP, and you're about to hear from HP now. It's going to be Richard McGuinness, and we think it's really good. So, thanks again for joining us.
This is not a tree. It's every milestone and misstep that's led you here. Your time to branch out beyond 2 dimensions and leap into 3D. With the computing power of Z. It's one breakthrough that unlocks 1,000 more. This is not a tree. It's the next era of your creativity. Z by HP.
Okay, so thank you for joining us on our inaugural podcast, and who better to have on episode 1 than HP. So we've got Richard McGuinness here, who's a workstation specialist in the large enterprise team.
That's it.
For those of you just joining us, that's had to be taken twice, but I got it right second time. So one thing kind of I wanted to touch on today is, so obviously you work for HPI.
I do.
We as a reseller are really good at selling client devices.
Yeah.
Sometimes in reseller world, I find that client device is almost a dirty word. You know, everyone wants to say, you know, we're selling solutions, we're doing this, everything is as a service. But when me and you spoke kind of prior to coming on air, I think one thing that's apparent is that a client device, when done right, is a solution at a micro level.
Yeah.
And I think we spoke about the Z4R specifically with regards to that, especially talking hybrid working and things like that. Could you speak to us a little bit about how client as a product set can be a solution?
Sure, yeah. So if you think about the world we're moving into, you're going to find a lot of businesses are going to be, people are going to be in 2 days, out 3 days. Now for an IT guy, especially for a performance user, that can be a bit of a headache. Yeah. Lots of other things are changing. You know, the resolution that we show a lot of our projects in are improving, which obviously means a lot more data. So again, where that data resides is also very much a balancing act. So. For example, if you were doing an FHD project, if you move that to a 4K project, that's 4 times the amount of data. So already that creates a problem trying to get pixels to endpoints and so forth. One of the things that we've been advocating for a while is the fact that you can now centralize that compute a lot easier, a lot simpler. You know, we have devices like the Z4R, which in effect is a standard Z4 that's been squashed and put into a pizza box. Yeah. Which we then can house in either a customer's existing data center, maybe on-prem, or in a third-party data center. The advantages for the IT guys are the fact that their core devices can be right next door to their core storage infrastructure, and it can be right next door to your core networking infrastructure. With the Z4R, it's our first ever machines have 10 gig on board, for example. So we're really going to start to take advantage of the fact that we, rather than recabling the whole floor, we can now start to really simplify that whole interconnect between the machine and the networking side of things, which in turn can give users a really good experience around their storage devices. So turn that into a hybrid workflow. That makes life very simple. We're very good at remote technology. We have a piece of software called Remote Boost, which ships with every HP device. And that product, in conjunction with the way that we're centralizing the machines, can mean a user can have the same experience whether they're out the office or at home, working from home, or whether they're in the office, because in effect it works like a KVM extender.
So when I talk to my kind of technical experts in-house and our friends at HPE, when we talk hybrid working, a lot of what we talk about, especially with regards to power users, would be something like VDI, where you keep all your power in the data center, and then you're not buying expensive devices for your power users because they're able to use the power that's harnessed in the data center.
Yeah.
How would you kind of respond to that?
Quite simply, really performance. So, what you're going to find is, VDI has a place in certain places. I'm not here to say that VDI is a bad solution. There is a place for a VDI solution, but for me, it tends to be a lower level. What we're always going to see, I touched on things like resolution earlier.
Yeah.
Over a 3-year period of time, resolution is going to improve. The things like HDR are starting to come in quite a lot now.
Yeah.
A lot more, 8K is potentially around the corner. If you've set up your VDI infrastructure to be a certain amount of cores to a certain amount of user, a certain amount of CPU, a certain amount of RAM, a certain amount of GPU cores per user, you're stuck with that. So you're not going to be able to upgrade that very easily, very simply. So, as I mentioned, going from 4 times the amount of data from an FHD job to a 4K job, you can see very quickly that, you might set a VDI platform up for 20 users. If you take that transition to a high resolution, all of a sudden you'll probably cut those users by half.
So you feel like in focusing on the client, it gives you more scalability?
Yeah, we're one-to-one. So
Sure.
we'll always be one-to-one. And remember, at the other end of the situation, at the other end, I'm a user who's just using a laptop to actually dial in and shift pixels to my endpoint. I've still got a physical device at the end of that. That physical device can still have some RAM upgraded, can have a graphics card changed, can have a graphics card potentially added to it. So, there are lots of advantages for a one-to-one. Performance, for example, over sustained performance for that user over that period, over the lifespan of that machine will be there because it's a one-to-one. That's without even getting into elements like cost.
Yeah.
Right. So if I took it from a pure performance perspective, I've got one device for one user, and that gives me that performance.
Okay, so performance I get.
Yeah.
One of the things my intelligent guys in the MyLab we have here at Misco would say is, okay, what about security? Where we're talking housing everything at data center level, your important data is never going off-site. You're essentially working with like a mobile thin client, for want of a better word. All of your important data is held centrally.
Yeah.
So how would you answer the questions around security concerns?
We are exactly the same. So at the end of the day, the data that resides, if you looked at Remote Boost and how Remote Boost works, for example, that workstation is within your network. So it's within your, the corporate network. The way that a user attaches that is via a VPN. So straight away, a few layers of security. The only thing we should put to the endpoint are pixels. So for that user that's at home, that's downloading that CAD file, he's downloading within your network. He's not downloading it at home.
Okay.
There is no ability for him to use USB devices. We can block those. There is, the other good thing is the bandwidth that's required is very low because we're only moving pixels.
Yeah.
So, but we move pixels very quickly. So, up to 60 to 70 frames a second, utilising up to a dual 4K screen, using things like Wacom tablets with USB pass-through.
Yeah.
So we have all the functionality that the user would have in the office, away from the office, as well as being back in the office when they're in that hybrid role.
So what does that look like when they move back to the office then?
That just becomes a KVM extender. So it's kind of very simple, and also this methodology is not restricted to putting machines into a data center. We don't really care in terms of the remote boost element. It doesn't matter. They just need to be within your network. So you could have that scenario as, COVID hit a lot of people quite quickly. Yeah. And they might have just recently purchased some workstations.
Sure.
They can still utilise those workstations that happen to be under desk. We can still take those workstations, put them in a data centre. It's just not going to be very dense. Yeah. So, and they won't necessarily take advantage of some of the other things that we previously mentioned. So,
I think for us, as a business over the past probably 18 months, the vast majority of our workstation sales with HP have been mobile. We're a very good Zbook reseller.
Thank you.
But I think something like the Z4R probably gives us another avenue to work at with having that portability on a true workstation. I think maybe one other argument that kind of a data center salesperson might say is, okay, what about sustainability? If we're upgrading devices frequently, how does that look for the planet?
Yeah, very difficult one. I mean, remember what we're doing again is, we've just got a basic one-to-one device.
Sure.
So, if you think about the application, because that's what's driving this, is the application. GPU offload is a big thing. Yeah. More and more software vendors are pushing more and more to a graphics card. So it eventually means we're going to get bigger and bigger graphics cards.
Of course.
Yeah. However, if we look at a Z4R in a standard configuration against a standard Z4, we're actually lower on power.
Okay.
It's a lower powered device. So a standard Z4 would be a 750 watt power supply. A Z4R is a 675 watt. Okay. Obviously, when we go up the chain in terms of i9s, desktop workstation can get up to and beyond 1,000 watt power supplies. So we can, there is a smaller power supply that we have in the device. We also have products like Z2 Minis. Now, Z2 Minis are very rackable. We can fit 56 of them in a rack, 7 per 5U. Obviously, specification-wise, they're not to the same level as the Z4R. However, for certain personas, maybe in the architectural industry, things like Revit users, for example, we can put that into 280 watt power supply. So, what we have are a number of different software layers where we can actually float those machines around different users. So we can give the user the power when he needs it, as opposed to giving him the power all the time. So it gives us a lot of flexibility around managing power envelopes, managing high-end devices within low-end devices, and having layers that the IT guys can actually move the power to the user when he needs it, as opposed to him having a big powerful workstation he's doing email on, for example.
I think those elements, the kind of the flexibility and the scalability, are really attractive propositions for customers. And when we talk about workstation, we're typically talking about those power users. Right? We are talking about CAD and things like that. But one thing I think probably the whole channel has struggled with this year has been availability of stock. And so what we found is stock has been probably slightly better on workstation than it has been on EliteBooks, let's say. So for somebody who's maybe not right at the top of the tree in terms of power users, could you maybe talk about why, if there's some Fireflies available and there are no 840s or something like that, why go up the stack? Apart from availability, obviously, but what are the additional benefits that they're going to get from going up the stack?
So, we kind of just touched on it a little bit earlier. GPU offload is a big thing. Obviously, there's been lots of battles out there between the various CPU vendors over the last sort of 12 months, who's the best performing, who's the best, and so forth. And you're always going to get, people, jumping above each other in that respect. But if you think about the rise of the GPU and where the GPU has started to come into, companies like Adobe really utilize the GPU as much as they can, because it's very simple to program. Well, I'm not a programmer, so I'd say it's simple. They'll probably get some programmers probably now going to cause me some trouble, but
leave it in the comments.
However, CUDA is a well-versed universal program. A lot of companies are writing to CUDA. So where traditionally a piece of software might look to the CPU for a particular performance, they're now starting to balance that with the GPU. So products like Photoshop, products like Premiere, of course, things like Illustrator, take advantage of having a GPU there. So there may be, for longer term sustainability for the customer within that particular machine, that will give them maybe a lot more bang for their buck over that period of time than maybe a machine without a graphics card, for example.
I'm with you.
Maybe slightly long-winded way of answering but I would say the GPU is making a big difference. At HP, we've seen a massive rise in that, the move from an 840 to something like a Firefly. That Firefly is a really good device. It is an 840. The only difference is it has an optional graphics card.
I think that does work quite well, because graphics cards are, they've been the most in-demand product. I know we spoke before, and we didn't want to use words like constraints, or let's say in demand, difficult to procure sometimes. So I think having obviously a device with that already in kind of negates that concern. I think you're kind of just starting to touch on it a little. You've done a really good job at explaining, why workstation. You should work in it. You should.
I shouldn't have
you should have a job doing that. But I guess the next probably sensible question would be, why HP?
Yeah, in terms, what from a HP perspective, I've not always been a HP. I've been the other side of the fence, working a lot in the visual effects industry. And some of the true core values of HP really helped me a lot in that world, which was, reliability. HP, test the devices, the mil-spec testing that HP have, I think, is second to none. I think it's better than maybe some of our competitions out there.
I appreciate you for not naming them as well.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Our ISV certification is very strong. If you look at products like Avid, for example, we're very engaged with them at an engineering level, the same as we are with Adobe. There is an ability for vendors to self-certify. We don't follow that. Sometimes we can be slightly later to market with a product from a certification perspective, but that's because we're certifying it on production models.
So we've been through a similar thing on a lot of public sector tenders now ask about sustainability, and you can kind of self-certify, but he'll love me for saying this, but our sustainability lead here says, you know, you should never mark your own homework.
Yeah.
You know, so it's kind of is that, right?
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. And what we're starting to see, obviously, HP from a sustainability standpoint has got a lot of powerful messaging out there. We're starting to see lots of recycled plastics going back into devices. You know, the mobile workstations that I look after are starting to get more and more as time moves on. We're seeing a massive reduction in the packaging that we have. You know, products like the Z4R we spoke about a bit earlier. That has, you know, multi-unit packaging available. Yeah. So, you know, if you're buying 5, you know, why get 5 separate boxes? Why get one big one? Sure. It sounds ridiculous, but it absolutely makes a difference, especially for companies that are working in London, for example. That just to get rid of cardboard can be an awkward
of course
and an expensive thing to do as well. That's without, you know, the knock-on effect that we're having towards the planet. So,
do you think this has been something like that messaging there is led by HP or led by the consumer? And HP are kind of following that demand?
I don't know. I mean, that's probably way above my level in that respect. But I would think that, you know, HP have always tried to do the right thing. I think from what I've seen. And that's been, you know, being a user on the other side of the fence, like working in a reseller channel. It's always been something that we've seen constantly being adopted. You know, the way the packaging has changed over the years, for example, to take advantage of that. And Now we're seeing a lot, say public sector tenders, and a lot more companies are using sustainability message a lot higher.
I think it kind of has to be now. There's been almost a little bit of, probably over the past 5 years, some companies have greenwashed a little, and I think now the way things are, I think you have to believe it. You know, I think previously, you know, everyone had a sustainability message, whereas I think now you have to have at least somebody pushing forward within a company that truly believes that message and gets everyone else on board from it.
Yeah, and there are sustainability experts at HP that spend a lot of their time doing this. You know, the guys are very well versed in and where we are tracking against our competitors, for example, in the market sector. So, you know, as a HP employee, there's a big message that comes through to us as HP employees around sustainability, and obviously it's nice to see what the company is doing out in the market.
HP for us as a reseller always been wonderful to work with. I mean, even before my time, which, you know, it's only been really 2 years, but it feels like a lifetime. HP have been a huge part of our business, and really easy to engage with. And I think working with people like yourself, but the end user guys, it's really kind of fundamental to like your success with HP. I guess you being in and around the people that are driving the demand helps us to understand what's going on with the trends and with, you know, where we need to be. And I think especially on something like Workstation and like the advent of like even slightly lower level users needing that graphics capability, I think probably it's a bit chicken and egg as to whether we as resellers are driving that or whether you guys and the end users are bringing that to us a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one. I mean, first of all, I'm one of 5. There's a lot of me in that respect. I mean, I'm not quite duplicated because that'd be a scary thing, wouldn't it? But there are 5 of us around. You know, we're overlays. So, you know, we run across all of the segments. So corporate and global, large enterprise, public sector, mid-market as we know it today. We're there, and you know, our job is to speak directly to the end users. We want to go, you know, along the journey, if you like, with the reseller community as well. Sure. But first and foremost, our job is with the end users. Most of us have come from within the industries. You know, we get to know our products very well and how to position those products. So, you know, utilize us. You know, that's what we're there for. And, you know, on the flip side of that, we'd love to be able to teach you guys, you know, what we see. You know, we're very, very close to the customer in that respect. So the thing we don't send them quotes, and we don't do the rest of it, but we're involved in everything else. So that can be from a proof of concept project, you know, early planning through to proof of concept. Once that's done, it's all working, we're out and we're on to the next project. You know, that's our job. So
I guess I kind of leave with maybe a bit of a tricky one, but so as you say, you're out there all the time seeing what's happening.
Yeah.
Where do you see Workstation at HP kind of in the next year, 2 years? So you talked a little bit about 8K.
Yeah.
Do you think those are the kind of changes that are going to drive the next set of innovation, or, you know, where do you see it going?
There's going to be a lot. So the rise of the 3D engine, you know, that's a big one. If you look think it's very difficult. Some sectors are very, very close in the way they do things, but kind of slightly apart as well at the same time. So if you look at AEC, that's changed massively. The techniques that a lot of the large architectural and engineering companies are using are the same that film companies use.
Yeah.
Same type of techniques. You'll see more things like drones being utilised, helicopter shoots, just to show the potential client, this is what their building's going to look like when it is there. Of course, it's not there at the moment.
Yeah.
So things like that. What we've seen over the years is the move from, say, an architectural-based workstation from being literally just a workstation with a graphics card to being a very fundamental part of the whole workflow within an architectural practice.
Do you think that's as we as people, but consumers, have become more and more visual?
100%.
As we become more visual, we want to not only hear what things are going to be, but see it.
Very much so. And you couldn't really, as we touched on earlier, looked at an architectural visualization 10 years ago, it was a single camera fly through.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about being able to do VR at the site where your building is going to be and walk around it.
Yeah.
That's a massive move forward. And clients now expect that.
Yeah.
So, you've seen a lot of investment from a lot of high-end architectural firms into that type of technology. So for that example, a workstation has changed. So a typical architectural workstation a few years ago was nothing like a typical film-based workstation. They were very much chalk and cheese. Whereas now we're starting to see the workstations are very, very similar in spec. Certainly a film-based workstation may have a lot more RAM, for example, a lot more storage I/O in there, because of the nature of what they're dealing with moving images. Yeah, maybe compared to a Revit user in the architectural industry. However, they're very, very close, whereas previously they used to be a long way apart. So 3D engines are starting to do that. You're still going to start to see the rise potentially of virtual production.
Yeah.
So since the Mandalorian, virtual production has really taken off because obviously there's restrictions around the world, and technically it's very achievable now. And it's whilst there are big investments to be made, it's sometimes a lot cheaper than doing some of the other alternatives. And I've already had conversations with some leading architects around how they potentially could utilise that type of tech.
Yeah.
So having a real as well as a digital interpretation for their customers. So
like real life Space Jam.
Pretty much, yeah. And I was involved in one project where it literally is that, where they've got a real staircase but a virtual building.
Right.
So those type of things, and you're going to see more and more of those things, I think, start to pop up.
Do you foresee, it's like a bit of a corporate word, so apologies, but like co-opetition of HP partnering with like a drone manufacturer kind of who's working with like the AR VR guys at HP, working specifically with a drone company, or do you think ultimately HP will look to get their own drones? Or?
I don't know. Don't give them to me, I'll crash them. Every single drone I've had has ended up in the next door neighbour's garden, I think, so I'm not very good at it, or smash the lights. So I don't know in those situations. I mean, with the Omniset, for example, the VR headset, what we have done is created an SDK. So, that will probably be, in that respect, we're relying on the community then. We're saying, right, here's the code to unlock this device. So go ahead and make your own.
Yeah.
And potentially within that, if you want to share it amongst the community, then, that's a good thing to do.
So that's really interesting. So people who talk crypto, talk decentralization. So what you're talking there is decentralization, really, of you send it out into the market and allow people to kind of add their own parts to it.
Yeah. I mean, there'll be certain elements around, licensing of those type of things, if you want to be commercial or non-commercial, those type of things. But certainly, I think that having our own SDK around it certainly shows you that we're trying to open this type of product up, because, any hardware product is not valid unless it has a good software product with it.
Of course.
So the two need to go hand in hand, really. So it'll be interesting to see, what is developed for those type of headsets, for example. And where we do think those type of things will go.
Cool. Well, I think we've covered quite a lot there. Certainly going to give...
Only one more thing. Anything that, again, we didn't touch on VDI in that respect, just to say that one major advantage we have over VDI is we don't carry a lot of software tax.
Okay, nice.
So, you know, that's one thing.
That's one last dig to get in just before.
That's the truth. Yeah. We don't have to pay for virtualization.
Yeah.
We don't have to pay for things like GPU carve up either. So that's one thing to just add at the end. There you go.
Well, I definitely want to get our technical guys who live and breathe VDI to come in and give a little bit of a rebuttal.
Where are they? Yeah.
Maybe I'll bring them when you're not here. And they can have their rebuttal next month's podcast. You know, I really appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk to us. To be the first, like the guinea pig, you know, in a year's time when we look back and we've got graphics everywhere, and you know, me and you will be the ones.
We started it.
No worries. So, no, I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
This is not a wave. It's the chaos of creativity. Now you can harness that chaos with AI and the computing power of Z to explore endless possibilities and create in infinite ways. This is not a wave. It's the next era of your creativity. Z by HP.
Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as we've enjoyed making it. That's kind of going to be the format going forward. It'll be myself with a colleague from Misco doing the intro, because you know I really don't want to do it on my own anymore. Then we'll have an interview with somebody relevant and interesting from the IT channel. If you think of someone that you'd really like to see interviewed by us, drop a message in the comments or feel free to private messages. And yeah, we look forward to spending a little bit of time with you once a month.